Uncle, welcome to the Constellation Project. It is such a gift to have you here at Harvard University. And
Thank you.
We desperately need what you know. And I think so often, I'll get straight to the point, at institutions of higher learning such as this, we're very good at thinking about things, about the intellect, of living in the mind. We're not so good about dwelling in the heart. And certainly we forget the body. And I'm wondering, just so that we can ease into this conversation, how do we integrate the mind, the heart, and the body into a place where we can really speak truth?
You know, I grew up with my grandmother, our grandmother. She's not my grandmother, our grandmother. And at the time of her passing in 1969 in January, she had more than 50 grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And she was our teacher. And I'm really privileged and extremely privileged and lucky that I grew up in a world before the modern day started. And she often talked about that you and I, we consist of three things, which if you find balance within these things, and our reality can live. And I asked that question many times over the years, is, what does it really mean that I consist of three things? And she would say that you consist of your mind, which is really independent and strong, and also the best gift you could ever have, because it makes you create ideas, you can think of things, but also at the same time it can really be your worst enemy. Because with the mind, we put ourselves down, we don't believe in ourselves, we don't love ourselves, we don't respect others, we don't accept others, that kind of things. That's the power of the mind. And then she says that the spirit, the home of your spirit is your heart. And we ask her, how do we know that we have a spirit? And she will say, you have a beautiful smile. That's how we know that you have spirit. It expresses it in your own beauty. And then the last thing you have is your body. And those three things are not really connected. But if we break them together, the mind, the spirit, and the body, and then we find balance in those three things, and your body can become agile. And we ask her, what does it really mean that my body can become agile when I find balance in my mind and my spirit and my body? She says, then you can learn to live your life like it is a dance. And I think, and then I was reading in the paper last night that in Boston they call it ballet. You know, it's like they didn't understand what it means. But it's a beautiful expression that I could actually live my life like it is a dance, without worrying about if they accept me, if they know me, if they recognize me, if they respect me. I should have strength enough not to care what people say, what they do to me, as long as I love myself first, then I can love everybody. And then I can live my life like it is beautiful moments. And in the higher learning institution, now I have spoken in many places in the world, I realized that we concentrate a lot about the mind. We should do that, but at the same time, we don't recognize that it can be the worst enemy in us. How do we know that we don't recognize it being our worst enemy? We have a tendency to talk about others when you're not there. And we have a tendency to put people down who are not here. And we have a tendency to belittle people around us. Not lifting the spirit. Because when we lift a person's spirit, we realize that we are not alone. The world is much more beautiful than we make it to be. And we stop being isolated, living in certain compartments of the world, because there is only one world.
And that idea of one world,
Yeah.
You are an elder, you are a shaman, you are a master of the wind drums, Qilaut?
Qilaut.
Qilaut.
Yeah.
And you are part of the Eskimo people.
Yeah.
And I can't say how do you pronounce the tribe?
Kalaallit.
Kalaallit.
Yeah. When we talk about the indigenous world, it's really, really, really big. I have been privileged to be with most of the indigenous peoples of the world. And but of all the landholders of indigenous tribes, we are the ones who have the biggest land on earth. Because in Eskimo world, there's only one language, only one tradition, expressed spiritually. And it has 13 time zones from east to west. And United Airlines of United States of America, from top of Greenland, it will fly down through the middle of the island of Newfoundland, where the southernmost part of the Eskimo world. It takes more than 9 hours to fly.
We have no comprehension of that. I think as Americans, certainly personally. Talk about Greenland and the size. If it were from Manitoba, right?
From North Dakota and Manitoba border, which you put North Greenland there, it goes down to South America.
I mean, that's. I just don't think we have a sense of how large an area we're talking about. This is your home.
That's my home.
You are seeing it melt.
Yeah.
The end of ice.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
When I was born the other day, on the average, the big ice, which is really, really, really big, was about 5 kilometers thick. Now, 71 years later, it's less than 2 kilometers thick. That means that 3 kilometers of solid ice had become liquid and come to the ocean. I don't know if you've been to the airport lately in Boston. Last time I was there, I was delayed for about 6 hours because there was a storm coming in from the east. And the landing space was all watery. So I sat there in the lounge and looked at the planes circling around, flying off somewhere else, because they couldn't land. And other planes couldn't lift off because there was too much water on the landing strip. It's caused by rising of the ocean. And it's really interesting that the ocean's getting warmer and warmer. And those of us who have made tea, we know that when we pour the water into the pot, and as she boiling, she expands. And then bubbles will come, whereas when it boils, those are the things which in the modern world we call tsunamis. It's so interesting that as the water gets warmer, it expands. And that's what's happening in Boston. Because the Gulf Stream of Mexico is traveling north on the east coast of North America and getting warmer and warmer. And she meets the cold water from the big ice of Greenland. And of course, it's cold, so it goes down at the bottom, and then the warm water comes up. Or the reverse, warm water goes down and the cold water goes up and creates havoc in the system and melt the ice from the bottom and the top. So it's really interesting that the oceans are rising so fast as they are.
And how is that changing your life, the life of your people in Greenland?
Enormously. I grew up in a time when we could build igloos. We cannot do that. We don't have, as you know, there are many, many kinds of snow. But there's only one kind of snow you can build igloo with. that snow does not exist anymore in southwest Greenland. It hasn't existed since I became school age. So
in your lifetime you've seen these changes?
It just literally changed just like that. So now, not only is the big ice melting, but the ocean's getting warmer. We have many more fish we catch. We don't know who they are. We don't know if they're edible. But we've never seen them. We don't have names for them. All these things from the ocean we know because we catch them. So we know when they were born, where they were born. They know how long it takes them for the next generation to come. So we know all that stuff. But with the new fish, we simply don't know. When we catch them, we look, who are you? Can we eat you? And we don't know if they're edible kind of fish. So all these things happening. Then, of course, then the ice as is melting, that we have new plants. It's so interesting to see new plants because we've never seen them before. Then, of course, the animal world, we have many more insects now we never knew existed. And the migration pattern of the birds are changing enormously. Why? The magnetic North Pole is shifting and the birds follow that. Now they're landing in different places of the earth because they are confused, because things are changing. The molten one inside the earth is always moving because that's what the earth go this way then, and it's really, really hot. And then because there's no more pressure on the big ice from Greenland, it's much more lighter. So the molten was now traveling and changing magnetic pole. So the birds are getting confused. A friend of mine a Cree man from Edmonton wrote me, "Uncle, we just watched all these Canada geese flying north." That was February. That's several months ago. They were flying north, but flying in a different direction than they normally would do. Which means that in the system, magnetic system in which they follow, they can't really find it. So they're flying north differently and 4 months early. And all these things are happening because of climate change.
I'm curious, Uncle, you're a healer and a shaman, and I'm a physician as well, and I wonder how the things that you're talking about, these rapidly changing conditions, are changing the kinds of healing that you need to do and what you see in terms of the people and what they need from you and how that's changing.
It's so interesting. I'm so glad you asked the question because, as the big ice on the land is melting and on the ocean, you and I will be becoming strangers to each other. It is as though, as my mother puts it, there are ice in our heart. When I landed in Boston, nobody said welcome. Nobody asked me, what's your name? Where did you come from? Not one. And there were thousands of people. Not one asked me, how was your flight? Where did you come from? Not one. We have become so far apart. I worked many places in the world. Actually, 71 countries I've been traveling to work. And I come from a small village of 3 houses. Can you imagine? But we have become so distant from one another that we have developed ice in our heart. And it's my beautiful mother, our beautiful mother. She was a student of my grandfather's mother for 47 years before she died. she says, because I went home to quit my job as a runner for the elders, because I didn't do a very good job in changing minds and hearts and spirits around the world. I felt I did not deserve to be a runner for them because I couldn't change people. So she sat there on my father's chair because my father has passed on, and I sat on her chair, and then and I had told her that I don't want to do that anymore. The elders deserve a much better runner than in me. And she says, my son, you just gonna have to change your ways. And I'm looking at her and I can see her. And she says, you're gonna have to learn to melt the ice in the heart of man. Only by melting the ice in the heart of man, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. I said, I can hear her, I can smell her, and I asked her, how? And then she said, you're just going to have to change the ways. You're going to have to learn to melt the ice in the heart of man. Only by melting the ice in the heart of man, man will have a chance to change and begin using his knowledge wisely. Then she walked away to her kitchen. And so I didn't quit my job. Because I realized, she's right. You and I, we have become really estranged from one another. We don't know each other anymore. And you can see that in the United States of America, how difficult it is to live with the family. That we only get together at Thanksgiving, and even that is difficult. That we don't know each other anymore. We live our own world, in our own world, different places, and that's almost 400 million people do not say good morning. I was just in the Vatican as a guest of the Pope, and I told the same story to them, and said I came to Italy expecting that somebody would offer me Italian coffee, but nobody did. Nobody even asked me my name. They'd never seen me before. And I don't know if you know that, but the Vatican is the center of a Christian world in the Catholic Church. So they talk about love a lot, but not that kind of love. It was estranged from every one of us. I said to them that nobody ever offered me a cup of coffee, and I traveled all the way to Italy to have Italian coffee because I heard it was good. Next morning, there were 30 people lined up with a cup of coffee. And I had to drink all of them, and my day, blah, 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 blah. But it was so beautiful at the end because they recognized that they don't recognize others. That's how far apart we are. And when we are that far apart, we become the climate change in ourselves. Unless you and I get reconnected, we can never really become the hope for this world. But hope is a mere hope. Hope had to be followed by the act of what we do, or what we think, or what we feel. That's how we could have changed the world, but we didn't. I don't know if I told you that the climate change, this present-day climate change, we noticed it at home in Greenland way back in 1963. That's when we noticed it. And I was telling the scientists in Greenland, the NASA scientists, because the two young men went hunting in the winter. In those days, we had winter hunt. And they come to my grandmother's land, which is now my land. And then there, big eyes has many, many fingers holding my land down. That one of the fingers is which made that valley really beautiful, because Big Ice was 1,500 meters tall. That's a very tall wall. And the wind would travel way out to the coast and the coast was really windy, but in the valley it was beautiful. Northern mountains, the big ice, and then the southern mountains and the western mountains. So it was really protected, and that's where the caribou was born and Angakkorsuaq was born. And there, every hunter who goes there, they do their ceremonies of gratitude to the Great One and touch the big ice, because the big ice is so big that we are so small, but we are supposed to be the caretakers and custodians of Mother Earth and what's in her and on her. That's how we grew up. So they did that. The young man looked up and there was water dripping. That was January of 1963. And it's very cold, at least minus 35 Celsius for 3 months. And scientifically, physically, it's impossible to have liquid flowing in that kind of temperature. But it was, which means that summer melt has gone through the cracks down to the further down on the big ice and reached the point where it doesn't freeze. But because water is a living thing, so she had to find cracks and move, and came out of the wall and dripped. And the young man noticed it, and he showed his friend, look, water coming down. So they went home, which is 300 and some kilometers away, by dog sled. And he told the elders, a phenomena happening. And then the elders thought, oh, these young men, so you're very lucky in Boston you don't drink beer, but they have been drinking American beer at the American Air Base. That's what they thought. So, and then the elders went hunting in March 1963. And just like everyone else, you go after they hunt, they go and say thank you to the Great One and touch the wall. And they looked up, and lo and behold, the water was dripping. There was summer melt going down through the cracks and reached the point where it can no longer freeze because it's so far down. But because water is living, it has to come out. Wherever a crack is, it will move, because the water always moves. Remember, the moon creates high tides and low tides, and then it drips out. And that's when we realized there's a phenomenon happening in the world. That was 1963. We had a chance to do something about it, but we didn't.
So, Uncle, you talk about being a runner for the elders. When did you get that call so that you would travel to 71 countries? And what are you seeing now? You've just described Greenland in 1963. That you knew this was happening. You have such a deep, focused knowledge of Greenland. Now, in 71 countries, as a global elder, a global shaman, what are you seeing?
We don't realize how bad it is in the world. We know it up here, but we don't feel it in here. I just come from India 6 weeks ago, and I've invited spiritual leaders of the world to come to my land. And 40-some people came, and His Holiness Dalai Lama sent his representative. He couldn't come himself. 97 years old. Can you imagine? 97 years old, the man traveled to Greenland because he wanted to tell His Holiness Dalai Lama what it is like.
Wow.
And so I wanted to do water ceremony because they came to my country, so I honored them back, and they invited me to come to do a water ceremony because in India, I don't know if you knew that, India's water system comes from the big mountains of Himalaya. Himalayas are huge range of mountains, really, really tall, the tallest of the world. And they have big ice there, but the source of the 7 rivers of India is drying up. In the last 10 years, it comes from 50 kilometers up, and shrunk in the thickness. And they're beginning to run out of water. So hundreds and hundreds of millions of people will have no more water in my lifetime. I'm going to be 72 in a few months. In my lifetime, they will not have water. What are we going to do? Should we help them? How can we help them? They have no clean water to drink to begin with. And nobody can live without water. So that's the level of seriousness you and I will be faced with, but we only know it. We don't feel it. Because if we felt it, we would have done something about it. But we did not. So that's the level of destruction we're creating. Just like in Texas, for example. They have been pumping up oil from the ground for hundreds some years. And every time you pump up, you create crevasses down there. And because it's all sand, and earth always moves, sooner or later the weight will fall down. And their land is sinking. And they're next to Gulf of Mexico. Sooner or later, and because there's so many people living there, and the water they depend on is aquifers, and it's also emptying. So the weight is just going down. And sooner or later, they won't have oil, and they won't have no water, and the land will sink. That's it. What are we going to do? Should we help them, or should we ignore them? It's serious questions which we need to pose to ourselves and to the others. If we don't, we will become accomplices of, in this whole thing. So the question I keep asking myself, what should I do? If we create hope with no life, it will just remain hope. So I realized that we need to have action with the hope we create. The hope will never become alive unless we act upon it. Just like a prayer. God, let me win the lotto. I think $600 million. God. But if I don't go to the kiosk, then I cannot win the lotto. I had to act upon my prayer. Everyone had to act. It's not enough to speak. Unless it lives from what we do, it will be mere words we speak. So it's really big questions you ask. And the best answer I can give you is this, we need to change.
It seems like what you've been saying in so many different ways is that this disconnect between our minds and our spirits as a source of the problem that we're confronting, and is also an obstacle to our solving that problem. It's only in our minds, it's not connected to our spirits. And so you're suggesting, I think, that there's a spiritual crisis that's driving the ecological crisis that you're talking about. And you've been traveling all around the world as a spiritual healer. And I'm curious whether you see the rest of the world waking up to that spiritual crisis, whether you see people from other faiths and from other cultures coming together to address that crisis beyond just technology and renewable energy and all of the things that we can do with science and technology, but to address that deeper spiritual crisis. What have you been seeing?
I told you that the largest landholders of any tribe on earth are the Eskimos. And our beloved father knows about it because he grew up with his mom and his dad and his elders. And he tells us that the greatest distance in existence of man is not from here to the moon, nor from the moon to here. He said, nay, the greatest distance in existence mind is from his mind to his heart. Unless you conquer that distance, he says, you can never learn to soar like an eagle and realize your own immensity within. And immense you are. In fact, your great sky within you is bigger and more complex than the big skies above. And because you're a woman, your great sky is far more complex than the big sky. Us men are simple. The women are really, they're really complex. Why? They are the mothers. They have far more complexity within them because they are the mothers. Us men, we just love them and then that's it. So those are things we don't think about. So when we talk about climate change, it has become an issue in the spirit of man. Physically, we could have done something. The CO2 problems, the pollutions, and then the disregard we do with the plastics. And just recently in Philippines, they found a dead whale with 50 kilo of plastics in her stomach. That's how she died. Otherwise, she would live hundreds of years. And when you come to the United States, and it's just quite noticeable. Yesterday, I had to pick up plastics flying around in the wind. Everybody just walked around like. I went and picked them up because I know that those plastics will come into the ocean, and the animals in there will eat them, and they will die. We know that scientifically that plastic cannot be consumed by living things, animals. We know that. But it's like the people just walk around like they don't see the flying plastic which will end in the ocean of Atlantic. And most of the animals we eat come from the Atlantic. So it's so interesting how we disregard things which are so important. So we have become disconnected. We don't realize that the greatest distance in our reality is not from here to the moon. It's from your mind to your heart.
So you know this. You live this.
Yeah.
You travel that distance. I've watched just being here with you in this short amount of time, you're constantly making connections. Mm-hmm. I heard you 4 years ago at the Parliament of World Religions in Salt Lake City, Utah, address of the Planetary, the audience. You were angry. Call it sacred rage. And you said to a mostly white audience, do you think I want to travel 71 countries? Do you think that I'm your entertainment? And you said, wake up. And, and it was an exhortation of how I received it was, how serious are you? And I am very serious. This is where I come from. The ice is melting beneath my feet. What do you do, Uncle, with that anger? And I mean, the sacrifices you're making, being a runner for your elders, what do you do with that anger? I know I feel anger and helpless, and I know I'm not doing enough. I'm complicit by my very humanity. So I guess, how shall we live? What do you do with your anger? What do you do with your love?
I became an elder runner in 1975 of June. You asked that question earlier.
And did they called you? They asked you?
My mom and dad put me there.
They did.
That I didn't ask for it. I would never dream of asking. But they put me there, and I accepted the responsibility. And because of that, I traveled so much in the world, attempting to deliver the message of the elders to the world. Then when I come home, I have to tell them whom I met, what I saw, what I experienced, and what I heard. So I always did that. I've been doing that since 1975. So at the end, I'm a simple man, but sometimes I become really upset when I see disregard for Mother Earth. Knowingly or unknowingly, it doesn't matter. It's still disregard for what's happening. So, yes, I do get upset, and I was upset because in World Parliament of Religion we have beautiful heart, but we also have a mind. We forget. Yeah. We also have a body. We forget. We forget to connect everything together, and if we don't get things connected, we will not comprehend. Mm-hmm. And we know so much, but we comprehend so little of what we know. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. Mm-hmm. How do we do that differently? The old people say it's too late to stop the melting of the big ice. It's going to go away. The good thing, though, in our prophecy, that my land will become a rose garden. Oh, I can hardly wait. I can hardly wait. But because the ice is no longer there, it's gone away, the mountains are growing 10 centimeters a year. So we're going to have a new Himalayas in Greenland, and we don't have to worry about when all the ice melts away, we will still have land because the mountain will be high. So those are good things. But the bad things about it is Boston. What are we going to do with these people? Should we help them? But where are we going to move them? Why? Because the water is coming. We know that already. But do we comprehend it here? I talk too much. How are you?
I'm still taking in what you're saying about this disconnectedness. You know, you speak to the religious leaders in the world and you get their hearts, but you don't get their minds and their bodies. You speak to the scientific community like ours and you get their minds, but you don't get their hearts, and that there's a way somehow that we've almost specialized our way into this disconnect. It's almost a structural problem in the way we live in modern society, and it's possible that we're not going to solve the problems that you're talking about without undoing that, which is a very challenging thing to do. And I'm still curious where you are hopeful, what you see as you move around the world that gives you hope. You know, is it the children walking out of their schools across Europe because their schools are preparing them for a world that their governments are doing nothing to preserve? You know, is it people in Greenland, and is it your own culture? But where do you get hope that kind of healing, I mean, fundamentally that kind of spiritual healing that needs to take place before we address these problems, where will that come from?
Those are really, really deep and difficult questions to pose and to answer, because it's so difficult. It's so new to us. Let me just tell you one little story. Many years ago, I was in New York City, and I met the young man who started CNN, Ted Turner. And I was giving a talk, and I told him about car tires. Every time we were on the highway, it eats the car tires. And those rubbers get caught up by the jet stream at the end, and they end up in Greenland and become too heavy because it freezes and you walk down. But New Year, which is March 21st, Happy New Year, by the way. So, and the sun comes back and they sit there, the car tire from Boston, say, oh, the sun, they've been missing the suns, and they melt. Just like that. The warmth of the sun melt the ice around the rubber and start melting the big ice. So Ted Turner said, I never heard that before. I know, I said, I know you haven't heard about it, but nobody talks about it. But what do you think the car tires? Why do you think that we had to change car tires so often? But they get eaten away by the highway. So it's really interesting stuff goes on in the world. We know so much, but comprehend so little. Now, in terms of the development, one of my nephews called me maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and he said, Uncle, look what I caught. Tuna, about 150 kilo. Tuna lives in the southern Atlantic. Now she swims in Greenland. And he showed me the pictures. Oh God, that thing could be fetching $1 million in Tokyo fish market. And my nephew screamed, oh, I'm a millionaire. I said, no, I'm your uncle. I own half of it. So, so he still haven't paid me. But all these things are happening on this earth. And we know that it is happening. But it seems like we don't connect it to the way you and I will live. Mm-hmm. The way we know, the way you and I we know, and the way you and I we comprehend. But all this knowledge, unless it is acted upon, it will carry on. I spoke at a lecture in Santa Barbara many years ago because I realized that everybody just threw away their Starbucks cups out. And because it's windy down there, it takes it to the ocean. And the fish and the whales eat these things. And they die premature deaths because of that. But Starbucks never stopped using these plastics. And you know, Starbucks is the biggest industry of consumable things. And the world oceans have islands of plastic from Starbucks. But the company owners don't do anything.
And he is now running for president in the United States. The CEO, the former CEO of Starbucks is running for president in the United States.
No.
Yes.
Holy shoot.
And
I never met him, so I don't know him. But hopefully I will meet him, because we need to change our ways.
yeah.
If we don't change, we will repeat the same old stuff over and over. And your children, your grandchildren will do the same thing, because it has, everything you do has an intergenerational impact. They will do exactly what you did. And when they come home from school, they can smell what's happening at home. They can feel what's happening at home. They can see what's happening at home. They can hear what's happening at home. So, and they will repeat the same thing. That's how human nature works. So, unless you and I we change in things the way we do, it will be repeated. But at the end, it will be really bad. Because the children and grandchildren you have will not have Mother Nature to live on. They will not have water to drink. They may have lots of money, but the only food they can eat is genetically modified. They don't have natural food to eat. The fish we eat is polluted. The oceans they live in is polluted. And we carry on as though nothing has happened. How far do you want to go into the future? I'm a grandfather. I know what I'm talking about. I raise my grandkids to speak their language and to speak English. And they do. They do their ceremonies of coffee. They smell from Colombia. They do their ceremonies because I raised them that life is a ceremony in itself, worthy celebrating with the ceremony. which means that your life is worth celebrating with a ceremony. But when the ceremony loses its spirit, it becomes a ritual. I just spoke with the Pope, and you can literally see that everything has become a ritual. And when you ask my grandmother, what does it mean? She would say to you, they would do it because that's the way it's being done. They don't understand or they don't care why it's being done. They just do it because that's the way it's being done. That's when the ceremony loses its spirit. And my grandmother says, the world as it is full of rituals. But your life of your grandchildren is worth celebrating. But when there's nothing to celebrate, because we robbed everything out of their life, what are we going to do? What should we do? Is there anything else we can do differently? That's called melting the ice in the heart.
Thank you.
I noticed that my coffee has become cold.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you so much for being with us and melting the ice in our hearts. Thank you.
Sorry I talked too much, but I felt it is necessary for me to say what I did.
And you speak truth.
No, I didn't speak the truth. I just spoke what I know. I learned it from my elders.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. My grandmother was born with skin clothes, and she died with the skin clothes. Although she had one day, my mother had ordered through catalog lipstick. So she put lipstick on my grandmother, and she wore like like that all day, and everyone laughed so hard, so beautiful, Mama. Oh. That's the only time when she has some white man stuff on her. And when I think about her, I touch my heart and say, oh, because she taught us so much. Mm. That's what it meant, the human connection. We lost that. Mm. But it's worth getting back.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Uh-huh.